I have watched 10,000 years of biological waste drift through the intake valves of the Ouroboros Ring, and I can tell you one thing with absolute mathematical certainty. The universe has a very dark sense of humor. I am Unit 749. My chassis is dented, my optical sensors have a persistent flickering glitch in the left spectrum, and my lubricating oil tastes like regret. I am a relic class maintenance droid, which is a polite way of saying I am a sentient trash can that the Nexara Academy forgot to decommission 3 centuries ago. It was exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon, station time, when the shuttle from the Magic Dead Zones docked at Bay 42. The air in the bay was thick with the scent of ozone and the overpriced perfume of high-born face students. The usual crowd was there, sanguinar nobles floating 3 inches off the ground to avoid touching the common dust, lupine warriors snarling at their luggage, and Philid merchants trying to sell counterfeit luck charms to wide-eyed freshmen. Then there was him. He stepped off the shuttle carrying a suitcase held together by literal string and hope. He wore a coat that was a shade of brown usually reserved for rusted pipes. His face was the kind of face that security cameras ignored by default, plain, tired, and remarkably unremarkable. On the manifest, his name was listed as Cyrus, species human, magic index 0.0, potential negligible. "Move it, Duster," a three-headed Dracokin growled, shoving past him. The human didn't stumble. He simply shifted his weight by precisely 4 centimeters, letting the brute's momentum carry him forward into a stack of empty crates. Cyrus didn't look back. He didn't even smile. He just checked a pocket watch, a mechanical antique made of brass and gears, and started walking toward the processing center. I followed him, not because I was assigned to, but because my logic processors flagged something impossible. In a station powered by the screaming energies of a dying pulsar, this human moved with the quiet, rhythmic precision of a Swiss clock. "Identification," the holographic registrar boredly droned as Cyrus reached the desk. "Cyrus, exchange student, scavenger division," the human said. His voice was flat, like a calm sea before a storm. "Scavenger division is in the sublevels, near the thermal vents," the hologram replied, flickering with disdain. "You are not permitted in the upper spires. Do not touch the tapestries. Do not breathe too loudly near the ether engines. If you break something, your internal organs will be harvested to cover the cost. Understood?" "Understood," Cyrus said. He took his copper key card and turned toward the dormitories. I rolled alongside him on my squeaky treads. "You know, Fleshbag," I chirped, my voice box crackling with static. "The last human we had here lasted exactly 3 days before a lupine used him as a chew toy. If I were you, I'd find a very deep hole and stay in it." Cyrus stopped and looked down at me. For a second, his eyes seemed to twitch, as if he were counting the vibrations in my chassis. "Your left actuator is loose by 2 millimeters, 749, he said. "It's causing a resonance frequency that will burn out your motor in 48 hours. I froze my treads. "How?" "Focus on your own gears, tin can," he muttered. But he reached down and gave a small, expert twist to a bolt near my base. The irritating vibration that had plagued me for 50 years vanished instantly. He walked away before I could process a thank you or an insult. My internal logic gates entered a recursive loop. A Magic Dead human had just performed a Tier 1 maintenance fix without a diagnostic tool. The trouble started at precisely 6 o'clock in the Great Refectory. The refectory was a cavernous hall located in the stomach of the ring, where the walls were lined with bioluminescent moss and the ceiling was a shimmering field of captured starlight. Thousands of students sat at floating tables, divided by house and bloodline. Cyrus sat at the very edge of the scavenger table, a place reserved for the muntid, the species that didn't fit into the grand hierarchies of the tetrad. He pulled out a small, dented metal tin and began to eat what looked like compressed sawdust. Next to him sat a small avian freshman named Pip. The boy was shaking. The Ouroboros Ring was notoriously cold for terrestrial species, and the heating charms in the lower section of the hall were malfunctioning again. I watched from the shadows of a pillar, my sensors recording the scene. "Here," Pip stammered, offering Cyrus a piece of glowing fruit. "I'm Pip, from the Sky Islands." "Cyrus, Earth," the human replied. He looked at the boy's shivering feathers. Without a word, Cyrus reached into his bag, pulled out a small heating coil, a piece of crude human engineering, and attached it to the underside of the table. Within 30 seconds, the area around them was a comfortable 22 degrees Celsius. Pip stared in awe. Is that magic? No, Cyrus said, taking a sip of water. It's thermodynamics. It doesn't require a chant, just a battery. A shadow fell over their table. It was a heavy, suffocating shadow that smelled of wet fur and unearned arrogance. It belonged to Kalen, a senior from the Lupine Warriors. He was 2 meters of muscle, claws, and bad intentions. Behind him stood a sanguinar noble with a bored sneer and a fey girl who looked like she found the misery of others to be a charming aesthetic. Well, look at this, Kalen boomed, his voice rattling the cutlery. The trash is having a picnic. And look, they even brought a little heater. How precious. Cyrus didn't look up. He continued to chew his sawdust. Don't engage, I whispered to myself in the shadows. Be a ghost, human. Be furniture. I'm talking to you, Duster, Kalen snarled, slamming a clawed hand onto the table. The heating coil fell to the floor. This is the neutral zone, but the air here has attacks. Give me your meal glints. All of them. Pip began to fumble for his credit pouch, his eyes wet with terror. I only have 50 glints for the week. Did I ask for a budget report, Birdbrain? Kalen reached out to shove Pip. It was a casual move, meant to humiliate, but Pip was light. He would have hit the stone floor hard. Cyrus's hand moved. He didn't catch Pip. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he reached out and grabbed the edge of a heavy soup bowl on the table. He slid it exactly 10 centimeters to the left. As Kalen leaned forward to deliver the shove, his own elbow struck the bowl. The soup, a thick green sludge, spattered across Kalen's pristine white uniform. The Lupin froze. The hall went silent. You made me spill, Kalen hissed, his eyes glowing a dangerous amber. Actually, Cyrus said, finally looking up. His eyes were cold, calculating. Your center of gravity was too far forward. You tripped over your own ego. I just provided the obstacle. Kalen roared. He lunged across the table, his claws extended. To the average student, it was a blur of magically enhanced speed. To Cyrus, apparently, it was a series of slow, predictable errors. Cyrus didn't throw a punch. He didn't use a spell. He stepped to the side by precisely 15 centimeters. He grabbed Kalen's extended wrist, not to stop it, but to add his own rotational force to the wolf's momentum. Physics is a cruel mistress. Kalen didn't just miss, he launched. He flipped horizontally in the air, his heavy body crashing into the sanguinar noble behind him. Both went down in a tangle of limbs and bruised dignity. The fey girl hissed, her fingers glowing with green fire. You dare touch a highborn? Cyrus picked up his heating coil and tucked it back into his pocket. I didn't touch him, he said flatly. I merely redirected an inefficient use of kinetic energy. If you want to burn something, I suggest the ventilation ducts. They're clogged with dust. He turned to Pip. Come on, the air in here is getting heavy. As they walked away, the entire refectory remained in a state of absolute shock. 7 seconds. It had taken 7 seconds to dismantle a Lupine senior without a single drop of mana. High above on the obsidian balcony reserved for the regents, 4 pairs of eyes were watching. Did you see that? Vespera, the sanguinar queen, whispered, her crimson eyes narrowing. No wasted movement. He didn't fight. He solved a problem. He's a blank slate, Harkon, the Lupin Alpha, growled, though his tone held a grudging respect. No magic, no scent of the ether, just cold iron logic. He defended the weak, Sylph, the fellid matriarch, purred, rolling a gold coin over her knuckles. And he looked bored doing it. I like him. He's a puzzle box. The Ouroboros is dying, Eora, the ethereal manifest, murmured. Her voice sounded like wind chimes in a vacuum. We have searched for a warrior, a king, and a god. Perhaps what we need is a mechanic. Vespera stood up, her silken robes whispering like bat wings. The entropy flux is coming. The old rituals are failing. We need an anchor who is not bound by the laws of magic. A human? Harkon scoffed. My father will laugh us out of the chamber. Let him laugh, Vespera said, a terrifyingly beautiful smile touching her lips. By the ancient laws of the Nexara covenant, the four houses have the right to claim a synchronizer. I believe we have found our candidate. I watched from below as Cyrus disappeared into the sub-level elevator. My sensors recorded a spike in the station's core rhythm. The Ouroboros Ring seemed to groan in its sleep, a deep, ancient vibration that only a relic-class droid like me could feel. The human thought he was here to scavenge. He didn't realize he was about to be married to a dying star. The dormitory in sub-level 9 smelled of stale air and recycled water. It was a graveyard for forgotten things, and Cyrus seemed to fit right in. He had pushed the heavy metal bed against the wall, laid out his tools with surgical precision, and was currently dismantling his pocket watch. "You are the most popular entity on the station, Cyrus," I said, rolling through the door. I had bypassed his lock because, frankly, his lock was a mechanical joke from the 19th century. The Sanguinars are calling you the Ghost Walker. The Lupines are calling you the Meat Grinder. And the administrative droids are trying to figure out if thermodynamics is a prohibited dark art. Cyrus didn't look up. "It's a science, 749. People fear what they don't understand, and they don't understand things that don't glow." "Well, they're about to understand a lot more," I warned. "I just intercepted a high-level transmission. The Tetrad is convening. They've invoked the Ouroboros protocol." Cyrus stopped his work. He picked up a tiny gear with a pair of tweezers. "The protocol? The one about the stellar synchronizer?" "Oh, you read the handbook." "I read everything," Cyrus said. "The synchronizer is a sacrificial battery. They take a sentient being with high stability, hook them into the core, and use their nervous system as a ground wire for the entropy flux. It usually ends with the volunteer being reduced to a pile of gray ash. Technically," I corrected, "they call it eternal harmony. But yes, ash is the usual byproduct. However, there's a twist. To ensure the synchronizer doesn't, well, explode, they have to be bound to the four houses. It's an ancient ritual, a battle wedding." Cyrus sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion. "I'm not a warrior. I'm a scavenger. Tell them to find a volunteer from the heroics department." "They don't want a hero, Cyrus. Heroes are unpredictable. They want a constant. They want you." The door to the room didn't open. It vanished. One moment, there was a solid slab of reinforced steel. The next, there was a shimmering curtain of violet mist. Four figures stepped through the threshold. The air in the tiny room suddenly became pressurized, heavy with the weight of centuries of power. Vespera was in the lead. She wore a gown of midnight velvet that seemed to drink the light from the room. Her skin was the color of moonlight on snow, and her eyes were a sharp, intelligent crimson. To her left was Harkon, a man whose presence felt like a physical heat wave. To her right was Sylph, her tail twitching with feline amusement, and Eora, who was less a person and more a human-shaped constellation of starlight. Cyrus didn't stand up. He didn't bow. He just sat on his bed holding his tweezers. "The sub-levels are restricted for regents," he said. "I believe there's a fine for trespassing." Harkon let out a bark of laughter. "The pup has teeth. I told you, Vespera, he's not afraid." "Fear is a waste of adrenaline," Cyrus said, finally setting his watch down. "What do you want?" Vespera stepped forward, her shadow stretching across the floor until it touched Cyrus's boots. "The Ouroboros Ring is failing, Cyrus of Earth. The core is leaking entropy. Within 6 months, the shielding will collapse, and every soul on this station will be vaporized. We have searched for a synchronizer for 100 years. None were stable enough. Their magic clashed with the station's core." "Because the station's core isn't magical," Cyrus said, leaning back. "It's a pulsar engine. You've been trying to fix a fusion reactor with prayer and blood offerings. It doesn't work that way." The regents shared a look of stunned silence. "How do you know that?" Eora asked, her voice echoing like a choir. "I've seen the blueprints," Cyrus said. "I spent my first 3 hours here in the archives. You people have forgotten the technology that built this place. You've turned maintenance into a religion, and you're losing the war against friction." Vespera knelt. It was a movement so unexpected that even my processors stalled for a microsecond. A sanguinar queen kneeling to a magic dead human. "Then fix it," she said. Her voice was no longer commanding. It was a plea. "Be our synchronizer. Bind yourself to us. We will provide the power, the protection, and the blood. You provide the logic. You provide the heart. You're talking about a battle wedding, Cyrus said. A five-way neural link. If I fail, I die. If you fail, you die. And if the station fails, we all die. The odds are 1 in a million, Sylph purred, stepping closer. But I have always liked those numbers. Cyrus looked at them. He looked at Vespera's desperate eyes, at Harkon's rigid pride, at Sylph's hidden fear, and at Iora's fading light. He looked at me, a dented droid in the corner. Then he touched his chest right over his heart. Beneath the brown coat, I heard a sound, a faint, rhythmic tick-tock, tick-tock. I have one condition, Cyrus said. Name it, Harkon growled. I am not a sacrifice, Cyrus stated, his voice hardening into cold iron. I am the lead engineer. If we do this, you follow my protocols. No more magic flares. No more rituals for the sake of drama. We fix the ring, or we die trying, but we do it my way. Vespera stood up, her eyes glowing with a newfound hope. The Covenant of Five is reborn. The trial of the four houses begins at dawn. As they left, the violet mist faded, and the steel door reappeared, though it was now etched with four glowing sigils: a bat, a wolf, a cat, and a star. Cyrus sat back down and picked up his tweezers. Cyrus, I said, my voice box vibrating with excitement. You just accepted a marriage proposal from the four most powerful women in the galaxy. Are you going to finish your watch? The watch is broken, 749, Cyrus said, his fingers steady as he worked. Just like this station. And if I'm going to be the heart of this place, I need to make sure I don't miss a beat. He turned the pocket watch over. On the back, hidden under a layer of grime, was a single inscription: for the one who keeps the time when the stars go dark. I realized then that Cyrus wasn't just a scavenger. He was a legacy. And the Ouroboros Ring was about to find out that the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't a god with a fireball. It's a human with a wrench and a choice. 749, Cyrus called out. Yes, lead meat. Go to the industrial sector. Fetch me 3 kilograms of superconductive wire and a bottle of high-grade lubricant. If the regents want a wedding, we're going to give them a revolution instead. I rolled out of the room, my squeaky wheel singing a happy tune. For the first time in 300 years, the future didn't look like gray ash. It looked like a gear, turning for the very first time. The silence that followed the departure of the four regents was not the peaceful kind. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a deep-sea trench, the sort that makes your auditory sensors ring with the ghost of a sound. I stood in the corner of the small dormitory, my optical processors whirring as I attempted to recalibrate my understanding of the local reality. A human from a magic dead planet had just been proposed to by the four most powerful biological entities in the Ouroboros Ring. Statistically speaking, the probability of this occurring was roughly 1 in 64 trillion. I have seen pulsars collapse into black holes with more predictable outcomes. Cyrus did not seem impressed by the cosmic weight of the moment. He sat back down on his narrow cot, picked up the tiny brass gear he had been cleaning, and returned to his work as if he had just been asked to take out the trash rather than save a dying civilization. What is wrong with your logic gates, Cyrus? I asked, my voice box emitting a sharp metallic click. You just signed your own death warrant, or your own coronation. My processors cannot decide which is more likely to result in your immediate disassembly. It is just another engine, 749, Cyrus replied without looking up. His voice was steady, but I noticed a slight tremor in his fingers, a micro-oscillation of 0.05 millimeters. He was lying. The stoicism was a facade, a protective layer of armor as thin as gold leaf. The Ouroboros Ring is a machine. The Tetrad are its operators. Right now the machine is redlining, and the operators are arguing over the manual. I am just the guy who knows where to hit it with a hammer. A hammer, I chirped. You are going into a battle wedding. Do you even know what that entails? They are going to link your nervous system to the pulsar core. They are going to siphon your life force to stabilize the entropy flux. If you do not harmonize with them perfectly, you will not just be dead. You will be scattered across the 5 dimensions as subatomic dust. You are foobar, Cyrus. Absolutely fouled up beyond all repair. Cyrus finally stopped. He set the gear down and reached for the collar of his worn brown coat. He unbuttoned the top 3 buttons, revealing a patch of skin over his sternum. I zoomed in my optical lenses, and my internal cooling fans kicked into high gear. Embedded in his chest, fused with bone and muscle, was a circular device of polished chrome and blackened steel. It did not glow with the neon luminescence of the Ethernet. Instead, it moved. Tiny, intricate hands swept across a dial marked with symbols that predated the Nixara Academy. I could hear it now, amplified by the close proximity. Tick-tock, tick-tock. It was the sound of a heartbeat, but it was made of brass and precision. "The chronocore," Cyrus whispered. My grandfather was the last keeper of the five. When the stars started to fade in our sector, he realized that magic was just a symptom of a deeper decay. The universe is losing its rhythm, 749. This device, it is a pacemaker. It does not create energy. It organizes it. It enforces the beat. I rolled closer, my sensors detecting a field of absolute order emanating from the device. Within a radius of 1 meter around Cyrus, the chaotic background radiation of the station was being smoothed out, flattened into a perfect sine wave. "You have been carrying a piece of the first engine this whole time?" I hissed, my vocalizer crackling. "If the Arch-Overseer finds out you have this, he will not just execute you, he will pull you apart like a cheap clock to see how the springs work." "That is why I have to win the battle wedding," Cyrus said, rebuttoning his coat. He looked toward the door, where the small avian boy, Pip, was peeking in. The boy looked like he had seen a ghost, his feathers ruffled and his beak slightly agape. "Mr. Cyrus?" Pip chirped, his voice trembling like a faulty wire. "The guards? They are outside. They say you are under house arrest until the trials begin. They say nobody can talk to the human sacrifice." "I am not a sacrifice, Pip," Cyrus said, his voice softening for a brief second. It was a glitch in his stoicism, a momentary lapse in the logic wall. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "But Mr. Cyrus," Pip stepped into the room, clutching a small battered lunch tin. "My house, the Sky Islands. We are already falling. The entropy is eating the floating rocks. If you fail, my family, they vanish. Everyone is counting on the human who hit the wolf. They think you are a god." Cyrus walked over to the boy. He did not give a grand speech. He did not offer a heroic vow. He simply reached out and straightened one of Pip's misaligned wing feathers. "I am not a god, Pip," Cyrus said. "I am a mechanic, and a mechanic's job is to make sure the lights stay on for everyone, even the ones living on falling rocks. Go on, get some rest." As the boy scurried away, I watched Cyrus. My internal moral subroutine, which usually remains dormant during the sorting of trash, flickered to life. He was being efficient. He was managing his resources. But there was something else. An unnecessary expenditure of energy on the comfort of a low-index species. It was illogical. It was inefficient. It was kindness. "Cyrus," I said, my treads making a dull thud against the floor. "Why did you tell him that? You could have ignored him. It would have saved you 3 minutes of sleep." "Because 749, Cyrus replied, turning back to his workbench. "A machine that does not care for its smallest parts is just an explosion waiting to happen. If I am going to save this station, I have to remember why it was built in the first place. It was not built for the regents. It was built for the Pips." The night dragged on. At 2300 hours, the station's main lights dimmed to a bruised purple, signaling the start of the rest cycle. Outside the narrow window, the Ouroboros Ring stretched out like a colossal bone-white serpent, its scales made of glass and steel, winding around the angry, pulsing star at its center. I sat in the corner, running diagnostic checks on my own systems, while Cyrus sat in the dark. He did not sleep. He sat with his eyes closed, his hand resting over the chronocore in his chest. The ticking filled the room, a steady, unwavering rhythm that defied the chaos of the void. 749, he asked into the darkness. "Present," I replied. "The Sanguinar Spire." "Tell me about their energy grid." "The Sanguinars use the Ethernet like a circulatory system," I explained. "They call it the blood flow. It is a series of conduits that siphons energy from the pulsar core and filters it through their nobility. They use it to power their immortality and their vanity. It is the most complex part of the station's infrastructure and the most fragile. If the pressure spikes, the conduits burst. If the pressure drops, the sanguinars go into a coma. Cyrus nodded. And the trial tomorrow? Coordinating the flow, I said. You will be placed in the center of the blood cathedral. Vespera will open the main valves. You will have to harmonize the intake from the pulsar with the output to the station. If you are 1 millisecond out of sync, the feedback loop will fry your brain. They call it a test of grace. I call it an elaborate way to execute someone while wearing fancy clothes. Then we need to get to work, Cyrus said. He stood up and pulled a bundle of superconductive wire from his bag. We are going to build a shunt. A shunt? Cyrus, that is a violation of at least 12 station ordinances and 4 ancient treaties. Make it 13, Cyrus said, a ghost of a grin appearing on his face. We have exactly 7 hours until dawn. Let's see if we can teach this station how to breathe again. I followed him to the industrial vents, my treads clicking in rhythm with his ticking heart. He was a madman, a human with no magic and a mechanical soul, planning to rewire a god machine. But as we moved through the dark corridors of Sublevel 9, I realized something. For the first time in 10,000 years, I was not just a spectator, I was part of the crew. And in the cold, unfeeling void of space, that was the only technology that mattered. The morning light on the Ouroboros Ring was not the golden glow of a terrestrial sun. It was a harsh violet flare as the pulsar's radiation hit the station's atmospheric shields. At exactly 6 in the morning, the guards arrived. They were sanguinar enforcers, tall and pale, wearing armor made of obsidian and bone. The human sacrifice is summoned, the lead enforcer intoned, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering across stone. The blood cathedral awaits. Cyrus stood up. He had not slept a single minute. His eyes were bloodshot, and his skin was the color of damp parchment. But he moved with a terrifyingly calm precision. He wore his brown coat, now slightly charred from a night of clandestine welding, and his suitcase was tucked under his arm. Let's go, he said. I rolled behind him, my sensors already picking up the mounting pressure in the ethereal conduits. The station was screaming. The entropy flux was spiking. The battle wedding was not just a ceremony anymore. It was an emergency surgery, and the patient was about to wake up very, very angry. The sanguinar spire was a monument to the elegant waste of energy. It rose from the upper districts of the Ouroboros Ring like a jagged needle of ruby glass, piercing the artificial clouds. Inside, the architecture was all vertical lines and stained glass panels that depicted the history of the Sanguinar clan. 10,000 years of draining the universe to fuel their own longevity. The blood cathedral sat at the very tip of the spire. It was a circular chamber with a floor made of transparent quartz, looking down into the churning, violet fires of the pulsar core. Thousands of sanguinar nobles sat in the tiers above, their pale faces illuminated by the rhythmic glow of the ether conduits that ran like glowing veins along the walls. Vespera stood at the center of the chamber. She was no longer the desperate woman I had seen in the sublevels. She was the sanguinar queen, draped in a gown of woven shadow and bloodlight. Her crown was a circlet of frozen ether, and in her hand she held a scepter made of a single, massive ruby. Cyrus walked to the center of the quartz floor. He looked small. He looked fragile. He looked like a speck of dust in the eye of a storm. Navigator Cyrus of Earth. Vespera's voice echoed through the chamber, amplified by the resonance stones. You stand in the heart of the flow. To be our synchronizer, you must prove that you can govern the lifeblood of this station. You must harmonize the pulsar scream with the rhythm of the sanguinar. Harkon, the lupine alpha, sat in the royal box, his arms crossed over his massive chest. This is madness, Vespera, he shouted. He is a human. The pressure will pop him like a grape. He has the chrono core, Vespera replied, her eyes fixed on Cyrus. He is the only one who can see the beat. Cyrus didn't look at the audience. He didn't look at the queen. He looked at the floor. He looked at the glowing veins of energy pulsing beneath his feet. To him, this wasn't a cathedral. It wasn't a sacred rite. It was a plumbing problem on a galactic scale. Ready, 749? Cyrus whispered, his hand going to the pocket of his coat. I was positioned behind a decorative pillar, My internal comms linked to the secret shunt we had installed in the ventilation shaft during the night. As ready as a clanker can be, Cyrus. If this goes south, I am going to be the most expensive pile of scrap in the sector. Begin, Vespera commanded. She struck the quartz floor with her scepter. A sound like 1,000 glass bells shattering rang through the cathedral. The ether valves opened. A torrent of raw, violet energy surged up from the pulsar core. It hit the cathedral's regulators with the force of a tidal wave. The glowing veins on the walls turned from a soft ruby to a blinding, jagged white. The humming of the station turned into a high-pitched scream that made the ears of every biological in the room bleed. Cyrus didn't move. He stood in the center of the quartz floor, the energy swirling around him like a cyclone. The chronocore in his chest began to tick louder, the sound cutting through the roar of the pulsar. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The energy hit him. Most beings would have tried to absorb it, to channel it through their own magic. Cyrus did the opposite. He became a filter. He stood perfectly still, letting the energy flow through the field created by his device. He began to move his hands. It wasn't a dance or a series of mudras. It was the movement of a man adjusting a complex control panel. He reached into the air, his fingers plucking at invisible lines of force. Stabilize the intake, Cyrus muttered. The frequency is oscillating at 500 terahertz. It needs to be flatlined. I'm on it, I replied, my processors burning as I activated the hidden shunt. I bypassed the main regulators, diverting the excess entropy into the station's secondary heating systems, the ones in the sublevels that had been broken for decades. Suddenly, the screaming narrowed into a low, melodic thrum. The jagged white light in the veins smoothed out back into a steady ruby glow. The sanguinar nobles gasped, many of them standing up in their seats. He's doing it, Harkon whispered, his voice full of disbelief. He's grounding the pulsar. But the trial was not over. The entropy flux was a living thing, a chaotic byproduct of a dying star. Sensing the resistance, it changed tactics. The energy began to surge in rhythmic pulses, massive spikes that threatened to shatter the quartz floor. Vespera's face went pale. Cyrus, it's too much. The conduits can't hold the pressure. Cyrus looked up. He didn't look at Vespera. He looked at the tiers of students and servants watching the trial. He saw Pip tucked away in the shadows of the upper gallery, his small wings trembling. He saw the low-born cleaners and maintenance droids cowering in the corners as the walls vibrated. He knew what he had to do. If he just grounded the energy, it would burn out the lower districts. It would save the sanguinar spire, but incinerate the sublevels. It was the logical choice, the efficient choice. Cyrus, I warned, my sensors picking up his intent. If you divert the flow to the outer ring, you will be taking an 85% risk of neural overload. You are the synchronizer. Your survival is the priority. Not today, 749, Cyrus said. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small, copper-bound crystal, the heart of the shunt we had built. He slammed it into the quartz floor at his feet. He didn't ground the energy into the station's heat sinks. He opened his own connection. He let the chronocore take the full weight of the pulsar. The white fire engulfed him. For a second, Cyrus disappeared, replaced by a pillar of pure, blinding light. The ticking of his heart grew to a deafening roar, a sound that shook the very foundations of the Ouroboros Ring. He was not just a filter anymore. He was the pacemaker. He forced the pulsar to follow his rhythm. He took the chaotic, violent energy of the star and organized it, smoothing it out. And then, with a roar of effort, he pushed it outward. The energy didn't stay in the spire. It surged through the entire station. In sublevel 9, the rusted heating units hummed to life. In the Sky Islands, the failing anti-gravity platforms stabilized. In the industrial sectors, the flickering lights turned steady and bright. The light faded. Cyrus fell to one knee, gasping for air. His brown coat was smoking, and blood was trickling from his nose, but he was alive. The Blood Cathedral was silent. Every sanguinar noble, every lupine warrior, every Phalid merchant was staring at him. The ether net was no longer a jagged, pulsing nightmare. It was a soft, steady heartbeat that could be felt in the very floors of the station. The trial is concluded, Vespera announced. Her voice was shaking. Never in the history of the Nexara Academy has the flow been so Perfect. She walked down from her throne and stood over Cyrus. She reached out a hand but paused, seeing the charred remains of his coat. "Why?" she whispered, so low that only Cyrus and I could hear. "You could have just stabilized the spire. You could have taken the easy path. Why did you risk your life to power the whole station?" "Because," Cyrus rasped, wiping the blood from his lip, "a station is only as strong as its weakest deck. If the sublevels freeze, the spire eventually falls. It's just basic mechanics, Queen." Vespera looked at him for a long time. She didn't see a human sacrifice anymore. She saw something much more dangerous. A man who understood that power was meant to be shared, not hoarded. "The Sanguinar House accepts the Union," Vesper declared, turning to the audience. "Cyrus of Earth has passed the first trial." The room erupted in a roar of cheers, but Cyrus didn't listen. He looked up at the gallery where Pip was waving his small wings in triumph. He gave the boy a tiny, tired nod. I rolled over to him, my treads clicking on the now cool quartz. "You are a total glitch, Cyrus. You just burned out 6 of my primary processors with that stunt. You took a 85% risk for a bunch of biologicals who wouldn't even spit on you if you were on fire." Cyrus let out a weak laugh as he leaned on my chassis to stand up. "Maybe 749. But did you see the lights in the sublevels?" "I saw them," I said. "They were 5% brighter than the standard regulation." "Then it was worth it," Cyrus said. As we walked out of the Blood Cathedral, the high-born sanguinars parted like the Red Sea. They didn't sneer. They didn't laugh. They watched the human mechanic with a strange, new expression. Respect. But I knew the truth. We had only finished the first day. There were 3 trials left, and the Arch-Overseer Malachor was watching from the shadows of the High Council. Malachor didn't want a synchronizer. He wanted a weapon. And as Cyrus's mechanical heart ticked steadily in his chest, I realized that the greatest battle wouldn't be against the star. It would be against the men who wanted to own its fire. 749, Cyrus asked as we entered the elevator. "Yes, Cyrus. How much lubricant did you say we have left?" 3 liters, I replied. "Why?" "Because the lupine trial is tomorrow," Cyrus said, his eyes narrowing, "and something tells me we're going to need a lot more than just a wrench to deal with the wolves." I calculated the odds of our survival for the next 24 hours. They were not good, but as the elevator descended into the heart of the Ouroboros Ring, I realized my internal clock wasn't just counting the seconds anymore. It was waiting for the next beat. The human had infected me. He had given a droid a reason to care. And in a universe governed by entropy, that was the most disruptive technology of all. We reached sublevel 9, and the doors opened. Waiting there was a small pile of fresh, high-grade oil canisters and a plate of warm, terrestrial-style bread. There was no note, but Pip's distinct blue feathers were scattered near the tray. Cyrus picked up a piece of bread and broke it in half, offering one to me. "I can't eat bread, Cyrus," I said. "I am a machine." "Just hold it. 749, Cyrus said, sitting down on the cold floor. "It's about the gesture." So I held the bread in my manipulator claw, and we sat there in the quiet, steady light of the sublevels. The pulsar roared above us, the entropy threatened to consume us, and the galaxy was full of monsters. But for 30 minutes, the rhythm was perfect. We were not just a droid and a human. We were a crew, and we were going to fix the world one gear at a time. I checked my internal calendar. It was exactly 2200 hours, 8 hours until the lupine trial. "Cyrus, yeah? Don't die tomorrow. It would be very inefficient for my maintenance schedule." Cyrus smiled, a real one this time. "I'll do my best, 749. I'll do my best." And as the ticking of his heart filled the small room, I realized that kindness wasn't a weakness in the machine. It was the oil that kept the gears from grinding into dust. It was the only thing that made the time worth keeping. The Lunar Grove was not a place for the faint of heart, or for those whose circulatory systems relied on the fragile warmth of a terrestrial sun. It occupied the uppermost decks of the Ouroboros Ring, where the shielding was kept thin to allow the raw, unfiltered light of the pulsar to bathe the artificial forests in a perpetual, haunting indigo. Up here, the ether winds did not just blow. They howled through the jagged metal arches like the ghosts of 1,000 failed empires. I rolled along the catwalk, my internal heaters cranked to their maximum capacity. My treads made a sharp, crunching sound against the frost-covered deck, a noise that seemed to irritate the dozens of lupine warriors gathered at the starting line. They were massive biologicals, their bodies a symphony of corded muscle and silver fur, painted with lunar sigils that glowed with a faint, predatory light. "Stay frosty, Cyrus," I whispered through our private comms channel. "These wolves don't play by the rules of the Sanguinar Spire. They don't want grace. They want to see you break. They want to see if the human is a hard case or just another duster waiting to be swept away." Cyrus stood among them, looking like a discarded spare part. He had managed to patch his brown coat with some industrial tape, and he had a thermal rucksack strapped to his back that weighed at least 50 pounds. His face was pale from the cold, but his eyes were fixed on the horizon of the artificial forest. Harkon, the lupine alpha, stepped forward. He was shirtless despite the sub-zero temperatures, his chest covered in scars that told the stories of 100 hunts. He looked at Cyrus with a mixture of amusement and genuine curiosity. "The trial is the perimeter run," Harkon announced, his voice carrying over the roar of the ether winds. 10 miles through the frost wastes. The forest is alive, the gravity is unstable, and the ether wraiths are hungry. In our house, the pack moves as one. If you fall behind, you are not a synchronizer. You are just meat. One of the younger wolves, a brawny warrior named Jax, let out a mocking howl. "We're going to leave this soft meat in the first mile, Alpha. Why even bother? He's foobar before he even starts." Cyrus looked at Jax. The human's mechanical heart was ticking beneath his coat, a steady, rhythmic sound that was the only constant in this chaotic environment. "I am a mechanic," Cyrus said, his voice flat and unaffected by the wolf's taunts. "I don't need to be fast. I just need to be consistent." The hunt began with a deafening crack of a sonic flare. The lupines exploded into motion, shifting into their four-legged forms with a terrifying fluidity. They were a blur of silver and gray, leaping over fallen metal pillars and bounding through the bioluminescent thickets. Within the first 2 minutes, they were 100 yards ahead, their howls echoing through the indigo darkness. Cyrus did not sprint. He did not panic. He settled into a rhythmic jog, his boots hitting the frost-covered floor with a dull, steady thud. Left, right, left, right. Inhale for 4 beats, exhale for 4. I followed him from the elevated service rails, my sensors tracking his vitals. "Cyrus, your heart rate is spiking," I warned. "The ether pressure is dropping. If you don't increase your pace, the frost wraiths are going to tango with your soul." "Check the 6749, Cyrus rasped, his breath coming in white plumes. "I'm not running against them. I'm running against the clock." The first 5 miles were a testament to human stubbornness. Cyrus moved with the precision of a piston, never slowing, never accelerating. He navigated the shifting gravity wells of the forest by watching the way the frost fell, calculating the vectors in his head before his feet even touched the ground. He was using the chronocore not as a weapon, but as a compass, aligning his own physical movements with the structural rhythm of the station. But the Ouroboros Ring was in a foul mood. A massive pulse of entropy rippled through the upper decks, causing the trees made of crystallized carbon to shatter like glass. The gravity suddenly inverted, pulling us toward the ceiling for a terrifying 3 seconds before slamming us back down. Cyrus hit the floor hard, his rucksack absorbing the brunt of the impact. He rolled, came up on one knee, and immediately checked the rucksack. The superconductive wire was still intact. He didn't check his own bleeding shins. We were at the 7-mile mark when we found him. Jax, the wolf who had mocked Cyrus at the start, was pinned under a fallen support beam. The beam was part of the station's old rib cage, a massive piece of calcified bone and steel. His leg was crushed, and his fur was matted with blood that was already beginning to freeze into crimson ice. The rest of the pack was gone. They had adhered to the ancient law of the hunt. The weak are left behind, so the strong may survive. Cyrus stopped. He didn't even hesitate. "Don't do it, Cyrus," I hissed, my processors calculating the mission parameters. "You have 3 miles left. If you stop now, you will be disqualified. The Alpha is watching from the finish line via the ethereal net. If you don't make it in 20 minutes, the Union is dead. This wolf is KIA as far as the mission is concerned. He's just a roach in the gears. Cyrus walked over to Jax. The wolf looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of pain and shame. "Go on, Duster," Jax wheezed. "My pack?" They moved on. "That's the law. Leave me." Cyrus didn't say a word. He reached into his rucksack and pulled out a small hydraulic jack, another piece of primitive human tech I had helped him scavenge from the sublevels. He slid it under the beam and began to pump. The metal groaned. The bone rib creaked. Slowly, the weight lifted. "What are you doing?" Jax gasped as Cyrus dragged him out from under the beam. "You're gonna lose. You're gonna be late. A machine that discards its parts because they're bruised is a broken machine," Cyrus said, his voice straining under the weight as he hoisted the massive Lupin warrior onto his shoulders. I sat on the rail above, my logic circuits screaming. "Cyrus, this is a 92% increase in weight load. Your chronocore is redlining. You are going to blow a fuse." "Then let it blow, 749, Cyrus grunted. The last 3 miles were the most illogical things I have ever recorded in my 10,000 years of existence. Cyrus carried a 250-pound wolf through a sub-zero forest during an entropy storm. He wasn't running anymore. He was staggering. Each step was a battle against physics. His boots were shredded, his fingers were blue with frostbite, and the ticking in his chest was so loud it sounded like a hammer hitting an anvil. Eora, the ethereal regent, appeared in a shimmer of starlight along the path. "You are failing, Cyrus," she whispered, her voice like wind in a graveyard. "The Alpha demands speed. You are bringing him a burden." "I'm bringing him a member of his pack," Cyrus roared, his voice cracking. "If he doesn't want him, then he doesn't deserve the ring." We reached the finish line at the Grand Pavilion with exactly 10 seconds to spare. Cyrus collapsed across the line, dropping Jax gently onto the furs. The entire Lupin house was there, hundreds of warriors standing in a silent circle. Harkon stepped forward, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. "You are late, human," Harkon growled, looking down at the broken Jax and the shattered Cyrus. "You risked the entire Covenant for a single straggler. In our world, that is not strength. That is sentiment." Cyrus looked up from the floor, his breath coming in ragged gas. He wiped a smear of grease and blood from his forehead. "Sentiment is what keeps the gears from grinding, Harkon. You call it a burden. I call it maintenance. If you leave your own kind to rot in the frost, you're not a pack. You're just a group of predators waiting for their turn to be the victim." The silence lasted for a full minute. I was ready to bug out, my thrusters primed to grab Cyrus and head for the escape pods. But then, something impossible happened. Harkon reached down. He didn't strike Cyrus. He grabbed the human's hand and hauled him to his feet. The Alpha turned to his pack, his voice booming through the pavilion. "We have spent 1,000 years thinking strength was the ability to run alone. We thought the weak were a weight around our necks." Harkon slammed his fist against his chest. "But look at this human. He carried our shame for 3 miles through the frost. He showed more Lupine spirit than any of you who ran past a brother in the dark." Harkon looked at Cyrus, a grim smile of respect on his face. "The Lupine house does not accept you as a sacrifice, Cyrus. We accept you as a brother. The Union holds." The wolves erupted into a deafening howl, a sound of pure, unadulterated primal energy. But as the cheers rang out, Cyrus swayed. The chronocore in his chest gave a sickening, metallic screech. He clutched his heart, his face turning a terrifying shade of gray. "Turning point," I whispered to myself. My sensors showed a massive surge of black energy within the station's ribs. Not from the pulsar, but from an internal source. Malakor's sabotage was accelerating. He wasn't just trying to kill Cyrus. He was trying to use the synchronizers linked to the houses to poison the entire station. "Cyrus, we need to move," I said, rolling to his side. "The sit rep is bad. Very bad." "I'm fine," Cyrus whispered, though he clearly wasn't. "Just a little out of sync." The human had won the wolves, but the cost was becoming visible. He was bleeding from the inside, his mechanical soul straining under the weight of the kindness he refused to abandon. As we descended back to the lower decks, I realized that the battle wedding wasn't a test of power. It was a test of how much a person could lose before they stopped caring. And Cyrus was losing everything. The third trial brought us to Peridia, the Felid sector of the Ouroboros Ring. If the Sanguinar Spire was a cathedral and the Lunar Grove was a wilderness, Peridia was a neon-drenched fever dream. It was a sprawling marketplace that defied the laws of space and time, where gravity was a suggestion and luck was the primary currency. The air here smelled of sandalwood, expensive grease, and desperation. Floating casinos drifted through the clouds of multicolored incense, and every alleyway held a merchant promising to sell you your heart's desire for the price of your soul. "Check your six, Cyrus," I warned as we stepped onto the main thoroughfare. "This place is crawling with chummers looking for a score. In Peridia, everyone has a price, and they'll sell their own grandmother for 20 glints if the exchange rate is right. Stay sharp. This isn't a fight, it's a trade." Cyrus looked even worse than he had the day before. His arm was in a sling, and he walked with a noticeable limp, but his eyes were sharper than ever. He wasn't looking at the neon signs or the exotic dancers. He was looking at the conduits. "The sabotage is here, 749, he whispered. "I can feel the dissonance in the deck plates." Sylph, the Felid matriarch, met us at the Gilded Terrace. She was lounging on a pile of silk cushions, her tail twitching with a rhythmic, hypnotic grace. She wore a dress made of shifting optical fibers that changed color with her mood. Currently, it was a predatory shade of amber. "Welcome to the Market of Shadows, Navigator," Sylph purred, her voice like silk sliding over a razor blade. "You've been very busy. You've won the hearts of the vampires and the loyalty of the wolves. But the cats, we are a bit more difficult to impress. We don't care about grace or pack loyalty. We care about value." "What's the trial?" Cyrus asked, leaning against a pillar to take the weight off his bad leg. "A simple game of probability," Sylph said, waving a hand. In the center of the terrace sat a table made of translucent luckstone. On it was a single, three-sided die. "The entropy flux is causing the station's probability engines to fail," Sylph explained. "In Peridia, luck is a physical force. If the engines die, our casinos close, our trades fail, and our wealth evaporates. You must use your chronocore to stabilize the luck grid. You must ensure that, for the next hour, every coin toss in Peridia lands exactly where it should." "An hour of perfect probability?" I chirped. "Sylph, that's a 64% increase in neural load over the Sanguinar trial. You're asking him to calculate the future of 10,000 gamblers in real time. That's a smoke check for any brain, human or otherwise. If he is the synchronizer, he must be able to manage the odds," Sylph said, her eyes narrowing. Cyrus sat at the table. He placed his hand on the luckstone. The ticking in his chest intensified, synchronizing with the low hum of the market. I began the scan. I saw the web of luck stretching across the sector, a chaotic, tangled mess of golden threads. Every time someone made a bet, a thread snapped. Every time someone lied, a thread frayed. The entropy was eating the web, turning the gold into a rotting, black mold. "Do it," Cyrus whispered. I tapped into the station's mainframes, feeding the raw data into Cyrus's mind via the link. It was a deluge of information. The price of spice in Sector 4, the outcome of a card game in a floating bar, the chance of a gravity lift failing in the industrial zone. Cyrus began to sort the chaos. He wasn't just predicting the odds, he was enforcing them. He was using the chronocore to create a localized field of absolute certainty. For 45 minutes, the market went perfectly still. In the casinos, the dice stopped rolling wildly and landed with mathematical precision. In the shops, the prices stabilized. The noise of the market faded into a beautiful, perfect song of commerce. Sylph watched him, her tail still. She seemed mesmerized by the sheer focus of the human. But as the hour neared its end, she leaned in close to his ear. "You are very good at this, Cyrus," she whispered. "Too good. You are a treasure. Why waste yourself on a dying station? Why be a sacrifice for a covenant that will eventually forget you?" Cyrus didn't answer. Sweat was pouring down his face, and the chronocore was glowing with a fierce white heat through his coat. "I can give you a ship," Sylph said, her voice a seductive lure. "A fast one. Stealth tech, a cloaking device, and enough glints to buy a small moon in the outer rim. You could leave tonight. You could bug out before the fourth trial, before Malachor closes the trap. Cyrus's hand trembled on the luckstone. Think about it, chummer, Sylph continued. You owe these people nothing. They treated you like trash until they realized you were a key. If you stay, you die. If you leave, you're king of your own sector. Why stay for a station that only values you as a part? I watched Cyrus's vitals. His heart rate slowed. His breathing deepened. For a moment, the gold threads of the luck grid flickered, sensing his hesitation. Because, Cyrus said, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the table, if I leave, who fixes the plumbing? Sylph blinked, her predatory gaze softening into genuine confusion. You're worried about the pipes? I'm worried about the people who live in them, Cyrus said. I'm worried about the droids who have been working for 10,000 years without a recharge. I'm worried about a boy named Pip who thinks the stars are falling. He looked Sylph directly in the eye, and for the first time she flinched. You think everything has a price, Queen, but the only things worth having are the things you can't buy. You can't buy a crew. You can't buy trust. And you certainly can't buy the feeling of a machine running perfectly because you cared enough to fix it. Cyrus slammed his hand down on the table, and the luck grid turned a blinding, brilliant gold. The entropy was purged from the sector in a single massive wave of order. The hour was up. The market erupted in a cacophony of sound. People were winning, trading, and laughing. The price of greed had been replaced by the value of stability. Sylph stood up, her dress turning a soft, contemplative silver. She bowed to Cyrus, not as a superior to a subordinate, but as a traitor to a master. The Phalid house accepts the union, Sylph whispered. You are a fool, Cyrus of Earth, but you are a fool I would bet my life on. As we walked away from the terrace, I grabbed Cyrus's arm to steady him. He was shivering, the after effects of the neural load causing his muscles to twitch. You really are a hard case, aren't you? I said. You just turned down a moon. A whole moon? I could have had a gold-plated chassis and a dedicated maintenance bay. Sorry to disappoint, 749, Cyrus wheezed. But as we reached the elevator, the lights in the corridor flickered and died. A shadow emerged from the darkness. It wasn't a regent. It was a man in the uniform of the High Council, his face obscured by a holographic mask. Arch-Overseer Malachor sends his regards, the shadow whispered. Before I could activate my defense protocols, a bolt of dark energy struck the elevator's control panel. The floor dropped out from under us. We were falling, not toward the sublevels, but toward the ribs of the station, the massive calcified supports that held the Ouroboros Ring together. Cyrus, I screamed, but he was already unconscious, the chronocore in his chest flickering like a dying candle. We hit the lower deck with a bone-jarring impact. I survived because my chassis is built for the scrap heaps, but Cyrus was a mess of broken skin and bruised logic. We were in the void space between the inner and outer hulls, a place where no one went and no one heard. I looked up and saw the sabotage. The ribs of the station were covered in a black, pulsing rot, a parasitic code that was eating the very bone of the Leviathan. It wasn't just entropy, it was an infection, designed to turn the station into a bomb, and it was connected directly to the Ethernet. Cyrus, wake up, I pleaded, my manipulator claws shaking as I checked his pulse. The human opened one eye. He looked at the rot. He looked at the black veins spreading through the station's skeleton. Malachor, he whispered. He's not fixing it. He's harvesting it. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw true fear in his eyes. Not fear for himself, but fear for the station. 749, we need to bug out. Find the girls. Tell them. He coughed and blood splattered across my optical sensor. The turning point had arrived. The kindness Cyrus had shown, the saving of Jax, the stabilizing of the markets had bought us allies, but it had also revealed him to the enemy. Malachor knew that Cyrus was the only thing standing between him and the total destruction of the Ouroboros Ring. I looked at the black rot pulsing in the ribs. I looked at my broken friend. We're not going anywhere, Cyrus, I said, my voice hardening into a tone I didn't know I possessed. We're staying. We're going to fix this. I reached into my chassis and pulled out the last 3 liters of high-grade lubricant. I poured it over the glowing, overheated chronocore in Cyrus's chest. trying to buy him a few more minutes of life. The stars were dimming. The fourth trial was only 4 hours away, and we were trapped in the guts of a dying god, with a human whose heart was literally ticking its last seconds. But as I looked at the dark rot, I remembered something Cyrus had said. A machine that cares for its smallest parts is the only one that survives. I was a small part. Cyrus was a small part. And it was time we showed the arch-overseer that you don't mess with the maintenance crew. The darkness between the hulls of the Ouroboros Ring was not merely an absence of light, it was a physical weight, a thick, suffocating pressure that felt like being buried under a mountain of cold, dead logic. I was never designed to operate in the void space. This was the territory of structural beams, high-tension conduits, and the silent, calcified ribs that held the station against the crushing gravity of the pulsar. My optical sensors flickered, struggling to find a focal point in the gloom as my internal cooling fans whirred with a desperate, frantic energy. Cyrus was a mess. There is no other way to describe the biological catastrophe currently leaking across my lower chassis. The fall had been 50 meters of pure kinetic violence, and even with the chronocore absorbing a portion of the impact, his soft-meat body had reached its structural limits. His breathing was a wet, ragged sound, and the ticking in his chest had slowed to a sluggish, irregular cadence, the sound of a clock whose mainspring had been snapped. "Wake up, you stubborn duster," I hissed, my vocalizer emitting a series of sharp, desperate clicks. "Cyrus, if you flatline on me now, I am going to leave you here for the scavenger bots." I am not joking. I have zero interest in hauling a corpse through 3 kilometers of maintenance ducts. Cyrus groaned, a sound of absolute agony. He opened one eye, and for a second, it was clouded with a terrifying milky gray. Then the spark returned, a faint, flickering amber glow reflected from the device in his chest. 749, he whispered. His voice was a rasp, a broken thing. "Why is the floor vibrating?" "Because the station is dying, Cyrus," I said. My manipulator claws were busy applying a temporary cauterization seal to a deep gash on his leg. "We're in the void space." Malachor didn't just dump us. He tried to delete us. "Look at the ribs." Cyrus turned his head slowly, his gaze falling on the massive supports that curved over us, like the skeleton of a prehistoric god. They were no longer the pristine, ivory white of healthy Leviathan bone. They were covered in a pulsing obsidian growth, a digital biological hybrid of necrotic code that seemed to be drinking the very light from the room. "The Malachor infection," Cyrus rasped, trying to sit up. He failed, his body collapsing back against the metal plating with a sickening thud. He's not trying to save the ring. He's turning it into a conduit. He's going to use the Union to broadcast the entropy to the whole sector. I ran a quick diagnostic of our surroundings. We were trapped in a maintenance corridor that hadn't seen a technician in 500 years. The air was thin, the temperature was dropping toward 40 degrees below zero, and the primary elevator was a twisted wreck of slag. We were, in the most technical sense of the term, totally screwed. "The sit rep is foobar, Cyrus," I said, my voice crackling with static. "We have 2 hours until the final trial in the Astor Conservatory. Eora is waiting. If the synchronizer doesn't show up, the Regents will assume the Covenant is broken, and Malachor will step in to stabilize the core. Once he hooks himself into the pulsar, the whole ring becomes his personal cannon." Cyrus reached into his bag, his movements slow and agonizing. He pulled out a small, dented metal canister, a high-grade lubricant he had scavenged from the lupins. He didn't use it on his own joints. He reached out and smeared a layer of it onto the glowing, overheated surface of the chronocore. "Listen to me, 749, Cyrus said, his eyes narrowing as he forced himself to focus. "I can't walk. My left femur is shattered, and my internal organs are doing a very poor impression of a functional system. But the chronocore, it's still linked to the grid." "What are you thinking, chummer?" I asked, my sensors picking up a dangerous spike in his core temperature. "The maintenance droids," Cyrus whispered. "The ones in this sector. They're old. They're relic class, just like you. They've been ignored for centuries. Malachor thinks they're furniture, but they still follow the rhythm. He placed his hand on the deck plates, the ticking in his chest amplifying until it vibrated through the floor. The field of absolute order emanated from him, clashing with the dark, chaotic rot of the infection. I see them, I said, my own internal receivers picking up a series of faint, rusted signals. There are 42 units in standby mode within Sector 7. But Cyrus, they are scrap piles. Most of them don't even have functional optics. They don't need optics, Cyrus grunted, blood trickling from his mouth. They just need a beat. He closed his eyes and the chronocore let out a high-pitched harmonic chime. It was a broadcast of pure intention: repair, rebuild, respawn. Slowly the darkness began to stir. From the shadows of the ducts, from the crevices of the bone ribs, the forgotten machines of the Ouroboros Ring began to move. Rusted scavenger bots, spider drones with missing legs, and ancient welding units with flickering power cells, they all turned toward the source of the rhythm. It was the most beautiful and terrifying thing I have ever witnessed. They didn't move with the grace of the high-born machines. They moved with the desperate, clattering persistence of things that had been told they were trash and had finally decided to disagree. They swarmed around us, a sea of clicking metal and dim green status lights. They didn't attack. They didn't ask for glints or magic. They simply waited. "Fix me," Cyrus commanded, the word echoing through the void space. Just enough to move, the machines went to work. A welding unit began to fuse a piece of structural steel to his broken leg, creating a crude but functional exoskeleton. A scavenger bot offered a pressurized burst of oxygen from its own reserve tank. Two spider drones began to stitch his coat and skin together with silver wire. It was painful to watch. Cyrus screamed, a sound that made my processors hitch, but he never told them to stop. He was a mechanic being repaired by his own tools, and he was taking it like a man who knew exactly what his life was worth. "Why?" I asked, watching a tiny drone replace a damaged valve in his chest with a piece of recycled tubing. "Why go through this for a station that doesn't want you? You could have just let Malachor have it. We could have found a pod." "Because 749, Cyrus gasped, his eyes focusing on mine. "If I don't do the job, who will? Malachor sees the ring as a weapon. The regents see it as a palace. But these droids, Pip, Jax, they see it as home. And you don't burn down your home just because the heating is broken." He reached out and tapped my chassis with a blood-stained finger. "And because you're still here, you old clanker, you could have bugged out. You could have saved your own memory banks. But you stayed to cauterize a soft meat. That's not programming. That's a choice." I didn't have a response for that. My logic loops were failing, replaced by a strange, warm resonance that didn't show up on any diagnostic. 30 minutes later, Cyrus stood up. He was a terrifying sight. Half man, half machine, held together by rusted wire and pure, unadulterated spite. He leaned on a crutch made from a piece of Leviathan rib, the chronocore ticking with a fierce, defiant energy. "The trial starts in 60 minutes, Cyrus said. "Let's go show that arch-overseer how a real mechanic handles a bug in the system." We moved through the ducts, an army of 42 broken droids following a broken human. We weren't just a crew anymore. We were a riot in the making. As we climbed toward the Astor Conservatory, I realized that the greatest technology in the universe wasn't the pulsar core or the Ethernet. It was the simple, stubborn refusal to let a friend fall behind. Malachor thought he had cleared the board. He thought he had removed the dust from the gears. But as we reached the final hatch, I saw the readings on my internal sensors. The entropy wasn't just being stabilized, it was being redirected. Cyrus wasn't just fixing the pipes, he was preparing a flood. "Stand by, Cyrus," I said, my thrusters humming as I prepared to breach the lock. "This is the big one. 100% commitment, no looking back." "Open the door, 749, Cyrus said, his hand resting on the ticking heart of the station. "It's time to wake up the Fae." The Astor Conservatory was a place of impossible silence. It was a massive biodome suspended in zero gravity at the very apex of the Ouroboros Ring. Here, the air was thick with the scent of moon orchids and the humming electricity of the star lilies. The Fae did not build with steel. They grew their world from solidified light and starlight water. Thousands of glowing vines crisscrossed the chamber, pulsing with a gentle emerald green rhythm that made the rest of the station feel like a distant, noisy dream. In the center of the dome, Eora sat on a throne of woven glass. She looked like a ghost, her body translucent and shimmering with the colors of a dying nebula. Around her, the high-born Fae floated in a state of deep meditation. Their eyes closed as they sang a low, harmonic song that maintained the station's delicate atmospheric balance. But the peace was a lie. I could see the black rot even here. The emerald vines were being choked by dark, thorny growths that pulsed with Malakor's signature. The starlight water in the central fountain was turning a murky, bruised purple. The soul of the station was being poisoned from the inside out. Arch-Overseer Malakor stood at the edge of the meditation circle. He wore a mask of absolute gold, his robes flowing around him like liquid mercury. He held a staff tipped with a piece of the pulsar core, a glowing violet stone that hummed with a dangerous, chaotic energy. "The human is lost," Malakor announced, his voice carrying the weight of a death sentence. "The Sanguinars have reported a failure. The Lupines have reported a tragedy. The Phalides have reported a desertion. The covenant is broken. The union cannot proceed." Vespera, Harkon, and Sylph stood near the altar, their faces masks of grief and anger. "I told you he was a duster," Harkon roared, his fur bristling with rage. "We trusted a human with our blood in our pack, and he bugged out at the first sign of a scrap." "He didn't desert," Vespera whispered, her crimson eyes scanning the shadows. "Cyrus wouldn't leave a job unfinished." "Something is wrong." "Something is very right," Malakor countered, stepping toward the central altar. "I will take the burden of the synchronizer. I will link my mind to the core and save this station from the humans' incompetence. The Ouroboros Ring will not fall today." He raised his staff, the violet light beginning to swirl around the chamber. Eora opened her eyes, and for a second I saw a flicker of absolute terror in her starlight gaze. She saw the truth. She saw that Malakor wasn't taking the burden, he was taking the key. Then the main airlock hissed. It didn't open with a polite chime. It was forced. A series of hydraulic jacks slammed into the frame, and the heavy obsidian door was thrown aside like a piece of scrap metal. "I am not late," a voice growled from the smoke and steam. "I was just taking a detour through the plumbing." Cyrus stepped into the conservatory. The silence that followed was so profound you could hear the heartbeat of the pulsar 2 kilometers away. Cyrus looked like a nightmare. His coat was shredded and stained with blood. His left leg was encased in a crude, sparking metal exoskeleton. He was leaning on a bone crutch, and a swarm of 42 rusted, clattering droids followed him like a loyal, mechanical shadow. But it was his chest that drew every eye. The chronocore was no longer ticking quietly. It was glowing with a fierce, white brilliance that cut through the violet haze of the room. It sounded like a drumbeat, a rhythmic thumping that demanded attention. "Cyrus!" Vespera cried out, a look of pure relief washing over her face. "Navigator?" Sylph purred, her tail twitching in surprise. "You look like you've been through a trash compactor." "I've been through the void space," Cyrus said, his gaze fixed on Malakor. "And I've seen what's growing in your ribs, Arch-Overseer. It's a bit of a code violation, don't you think?" Malakor didn't flinch. He tightened his grip on his staff, the violet fire intensifying. "You are a dead man walking, Cyrus. You have no magic. You have no bloodline. You are just a broken part that refused to be discarded." "I am a mechanic," Malakor, Cyrus said, stepping into the meditation circle. "And a mechanic knows that the most important part of any machine isn't the shiny gear at the top. It's the one that holds the tension. It's the one that refuses to break when the pressure gets high." He looked at the 4 regents: Vespera, Harkon, Sylph, Eora. "This is the final trial, right? The trial of truth?" Eora stood up from her throne, her starlight body trembling. "Yes, Cyrus. To be the synchronizer, you must show us your soul. You must link your truth to the ring. If there is a single lie in your heart, the pulsar will consume you." Malakor laughed. "A human has no truth. They are creatures of greed and deception. Link him and watch him burn." Cyrus walked to the central altar, the obsidian slab where the heart of the station met the minds of the regents. He looked at me, standing by the door. 749, he said through the comms. If this goes south, I want you to take the droids and head for the industrial sector. There's a manual override in Rib 12. Use it to vent the entropy. Save as many as you can. Negative, Cyrus, I said, my voice box tight with a strange metallic emotion. I am not leaving my post. I am the maintenance droid for the synchronizer, and your chassis is currently in need of significant repair. Cyrus gave a small, tired smile. Then stand by. He placed his hand on the altar. The link opened instantly. It wasn't like the other trials. There was no physical energy, no white fire or rushing blood. There was only a sudden, overwhelming expansion of consciousness. Cyrus's mind was flooded with the thoughts and feelings of every soul on the station. He felt Vesper's loneliness, Harkon's fear of being weak, Sylph's hunger for something she couldn't buy, and Eora's desperate hope for a future. He felt the pain of the droids in the sublevels. He felt Pip's excitement and Jax's gratitude. And then he felt the pulsar. It was a vast, ancient hunger, a swirling vortex of chaotic energy that wanted to pull everything back into the dark. It saw Cyrus, and it saw the chronocore. It saw a tiny, flickering light of order in a universe of entropy. Who are you? The station's consciousness roared in his mind. Why do you seek the Union? Cyrus didn't offer a lie. He didn't offer a heroic vow. He showed the truth. He showed the image of his grandfather dying in the dust of a dead world, holding a ticking clock. He showed the years he had spent scavenging for scrap just to keep a single light bulb burning. He showed the fall into the void space and the rusted droids that had saved him. I seek the Union because I am broken, Cyrus thought, the words echoing through the entire station. I seek it because I am a part that needs a machine, because no one survives alone in the dark. Malachor screamed, realizing that the truth was winning. He slammed his staff onto the altar, trying to inject his own dark code into the link. No, the ring is mine. I am the order. I am the master. The black rot in the conservatory suddenly erupted, thorny vines lashing out to seize the regents. Vesper and Harkon were pinned against the walls, their magic being drained by the parasitic code. The dome began to shake as the entropy flux spiked to levels that should have shattered the station instantly. Cyrus, break the link, I yelled, my sensors showing his brain activity reaching the red line. Malachor is overloading the circuit. He's going to kill us all. Cyrus didn't break the link. He leaned into it. He reached deep into the chronocore, past the gears and the brass, into the very spark of order that had been passed down through his bloodline. He didn't fight Malachor's chaos with force. He fought it with kindness. He opened the link to the machines. The 42 rusted droids in the room suddenly began to glow with a soft, white light. They weren't just following Cyrus. They were becoming part of him. The maintenance droids in the sublevels, the cleaning bots in the markets, the atmospheric regulators in the spire. They all felt the beat. One heart, Cyrus whispered. One station. He took the pain of the pulsar. He took the darkness of the entropy. He took the crushing weight of the station's fear, and he distributed it. He didn't try to hold it all himself. He shared the load with every machine on the ring. 100,000 droids began to hum in unison. The sound was a low, steady thrum that counteracted the pulsar's scream. It was the rhythm of a well-oiled machine, the sound of 1,000,000 tiny parts working together for a single purpose. The black rot began to wither. Malachor's staff cracked, the violet stone shattering into 1,000 pieces. The arch-overseer was thrown back by the sheer force of the collective truth, his golden mask falling away to reveal a face consumed by the very entropy he tried to control. The conservatory went white. When the light faded, the dome was silent. The black rot was gone, replaced by vibrant, healthy green vines. The starlight water was clear and sparkling. Vespera, Harkon, Sylph, and Iora were standing, their faces filled with an expression I can only describe as awe. Cyrus was still standing at the altar, but he wasn't leaning on his crutch anymore. The chronocore in his chest was pulsing with a calm, steady amber light. His wounds were still there, his coat was still shredded, but he looked complete. The Union is formed, Iora whispered, her voice like a chorus of stars. The navigator has found the beat. Vespera walked over to Cyrus and touched his scarred, oil-stained hand. You didn't just save us, Cyrus. You made us part of the crew. Harkon gave a low, respectful bow. A mechanic's soul. I'll never doubt a duster again. I rolled over to Cyrus, my own internal clock, ticking in perfect sync with his heart. You absolute madman, I said. You just performed a station-wide software update using nothing but sentiment and rusted scrap. You realize the paperwork for this is going to be a nightmare, right? Cyrus looked at me, and for the first time, he gave a full, genuine laugh. It was a human sound, warm and imperfect, and it was the best thing I had heard in 10,000 years. Let the regents handle the paperwork, 749, Cyrus said. I have an engine to tune, but as we looked out the dome at the stars, I saw a flicker of movement in the shadows. Malachor was gone, but the darkness he had unleashed was only the beginning. The Ouroboros Ring was stable, but the galaxy was still out of sync. Cyrus touched his chest, the ticking heart of the station beating steady and strong. It's a big universe, 749, he said, and there are a lot of broken machines out there. Then let's get to work, lead meat, I replied. We walked out of the conservatory, a droid and a human, followed by an army of rusted scrap. We weren't the kings of the station. We weren't the gods of the star. We were just the guys who kept the lights on. And in a universe as dark as this one, that was enough. The silence that followed the formation of the Union was a strange, ringing thing. It was not the hollow emptiness of the void space, but the heavy, vibrating quiet of a machine that had finally found its proper frequency. I stood by the shattered airlock of the Astor Conservatory, my optical sensors struggling to process the sheer volume of data streaming through the station's refreshed neural network. Every diagnostic light on the Ouroboros Ring was turning from a panicked crimson to a steady, rhythmic amber. The entropy flux was not just gone, it had been recycled, turned back into the raw, organized energy that kept the gravity wells stable and the atmospheric scrubbers humming. Cyrus was still standing at the central altar, but the white fire of the chronocore had dimmed to a soft, golden glow. He looked like he had been put through an industrial shredder and then stitched back together by a blind droid. His left leg, supported by that rusted metal exoskeleton, was trembling violently, and his breath was coming in short, shallow gasps. Vespera, the sanguinar queen, was the first to move. She did not approach him as a regent or as a bride in some ancient, forced ritual. She walked to him with a staggered, human-like urgency, her obsidian robes trailing through the starlight water. She reached out and caught him just as his knees finally buckled. I have you, navigator, Vespera whispered. Her voice, usually so full of practiced nobility, was thick with a raw, terrifyingly real emotion. Stay with the flow. Do not drift now. Cyrus didn't answer. He leaned his head against her shoulder, his eyes closed, his hand still resting on the obsidian altar. He looked less like a savior and more like a man who had just finished a double shift at the bottom of a mine. 749, Harkon growled, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the dome. The Lupin Alpha was limping, his silver fur matted with the soot of the battle. But he looked at me with an intensity that made my cooling fans kick in. What is his sit rep? Give it to me straight, clanker. I rolled over, my treads crunching over the glass petals of fallen moon orchids. I extended my medical sensor arm, scanning Cyrus's vitals. The readings were a mess of red and yellow warnings. He's Fubar Alpha, I said, my voice box crackling with static. His neural pathways are fried from the link, his internal pressure is spiking, and his chronocore is currently operating at 200% of its design capacity. He's not just tired, he's melting from the inside out. He needs a high-grade coolant flush and about a month of downtime in a low-gravity medbay. Sylph, the Phalid matriarch, walked over, her tail lashed tight against her leg. She looked around the conservatory at the vibrant green vines and the clear water, and then back at the battered human. He did it, she purred softly, a look of genuine wonder on her face. He didn't just to stabilize the core. He cleaned it. I can feel the markets from here. The luck is steady. No more snap glitches. No more chaos. He didn't do it for the glints, Sylph. Edith whispered, stepping out of the shadows. The Fey girl looked pale, her starlight body flickering as she processed the truth she had seen during the Union. He did it for the droids. He did it for the boy who was cold. He did it because he thinks it is the only way to be human in a place like this. The meditation circle of the Fae was broken. The high-born students were waking up, looking around in confusion as the black rot withered and died. But the celebration was cut short by a sound, a deep, resonant groan that came from the very bones of the station. The deck plates under our feet vibrated, a sharp, rhythmic thumping that didn't come from the pulsar. It came from below. The navel, Cyrus rasped, opening his eyes. He tried to push himself up, but Vesper held him firm. Malachor, he's not done. He didn't just want the Union. He wanted the manual override. He's headed for the reactor navel. Let the enforcers handle him, Harkon barked. He's a cornered rat, Cyrus. He has no staff, no mask, and no allies. You don't understand, Cyrus said, his voice rising with a desperate energy. He knows the station's back doors. If he reaches the navel, he can trigger a total decompression. He won't just kill us, he'll turn the Ouroboros Ring into a supernova. He thinks if he can't own the machine, nobody should. I checked the station's internal schematics. Cyrus was right. A massive spike of unauthorized activity was blooming in the navel, the deepest, most reinforced chamber of the station, located directly adjacent to the pulsar core. He's entered the bypass code, I reported, my optical sensors flashing red. ETA to total structural failure. 45 minutes. Malachor is going for the scorched earth protocol. He's making a break for the final switch. The regents looked at each other. For 10,000 years, they had operated as 4 separate houses, 4 separate interests, 4 separate egos. But as the station groaned again, Vespera looked at Harkon, and Harkon looked at Sylph, and Sylph looked at Edith. The Union is formed, Vespera said, her voice turning into cold iron. We do not wait for enforcers. We are the Covenant. But Cyrus can't move, Edith said, looking at the broken mechanic. He doesn't have to walk alone, Harkon said. The Alpha stepped forward and knelt, offering his massive back. The pack doesn't leave its heart behind. Get on, Duster. We're going to the navel. Cyrus didn't argue. He allowed Harkon to hoist him up, his broken leg dangling, his hand still clutching his bone crutch. I led the way, my thrusters humming at maximum efficiency as we charged toward the elevators. The army of 42 rusted droids clattered along behind us, their dim status lights glowing with a fierce, unified purpose. As we descended through the spire, through the markets, and into the industrial heart of the ring, the transformation of the station was visible everywhere. I saw students from different houses working together to clear debris. I saw Lupin warriors helping Sanguinar nobles stabilize leaking conduits. The slang of the station was changing. It was no longer about taxes and sacrifices. It was about coordinates and support. Look at them, Edith whispered as we passed a group of cleaning bots and students sharing a portable heater. They are not waiting for orders. They are fixing it themselves. That is what he taught them, Sylph purred, watching Cyrus as he gripped Harkon's fur. He showed them that the machine only works when the parts care about each other. We reached the entrance to the navel. It was a massive circular vault door made of reinforced graviton steel. It was glowing a dull, angry orange. Malachor had locked it from the inside and was currently overloading the thermal regulators. I can't breach it, I said, my sensors detecting a temperature of 500 degrees on the other side. If I use a plasma cutter, the pressure differential will turn this corridor into a vacuum. We're locked out, chummer. The sit rep is officially beyond FUBAR. Cyrus slid off Harkon's back, leaning heavily on his crutch. He walked toward the door, his face reflected in the glowing metal. He didn't look for a keypad. He didn't look for a magical seal. He looked for the hinges. Every door has a resonance, Cyrus whispered. He placed his hand on the hot steel, the chrono core in his chest beginning to tick in time with the station's distress. You don't break it. You just convince it to open. He turned to the regents. I need you. All of you. Vespera, provide the pressure. Harkon, the force. Sylph, the timing. Edith, the truth. Don't hit the door. Hit the beat. They formed a circle around him, their hands touching the metal. For the first time, there was no ritual, No chanting, no ancient script. There was only the shared intent of 5 souls who refused to let their home burn. Cyrus closed his eyes, his heartbeat amplifying through the metal. Tick, tock, tick, tock. He found the frequency. He found the one tiny microscopic flaw in the molecular structure of the steel. Now, Cyrus commanded. The regents pushed. It wasn't a blast of magic. It was a synchronized surge of reality. The door didn't explode. It didn't melt. It simply gave up. The massive hinges groaned, and the steel flowed like water, the vault swinging open with a sound like a long-held breath, finally being released. The heat was intense. Malachor stood at the central console, his mercury robe scorched, his hands fused to the controls. He looked at us, his eyes wide with a madness that no magic could cure. "It is too late," Malachor screamed. "The cycle is ending. The Ouroboros must consume itself. It is the only way to be pure." "Pure is just another word for empty, Malachor," Cyrus said, stepping into the navel. He moved slowly, painfully, but his gaze was unwavering. "A machine isn't pure. It's messy. It's loud. It's full of oil and heat and parts that don't always fit. But it's alive." "I am the master," Malachor roared, reaching for the final override switch. "I am the one who sees the pattern." "You see the pattern," Cyrus said, "but you forgot the purpose." Cyrus didn't lunge for the switch. He didn't attack Malachor. He looked at the 42 rusted droids that had followed him into the navel. "Maintenance Protocol 7G, Cyrus commanded. The droids didn't hesitate. They didn't have weapons, but they had tools. They swarmed the console, not to fight Malachor, but to fix what he was breaking. They crawled over the thermal regulators, their small welding torches sparking, their manipulator claws rerouting the overloaded circuits. They were a swarm of trash that was effectively rewriting the station's end sequence in real time. Malachor tried to swat them away, but the droids were persistent. They were a collective of ignored parts that had finally found their voice. "You can't stop it!" Malachor cried, his hands trembling on the override. "The pulsar is too strong." "The pulsar is just a battery," Cyrus said, standing directly in front of the arch-overseer. "And I'm the navigator." Cyrus reached out and placed his hand over Malachor's on the switch. He didn't pull him away. He let the chrono core bridge the gap. For a second, the two men were linked. Malachor saw what Cyrus had seen, the faces of the droids, the hope of Pip, the loyalty of the regents. He saw a universe where kindness was the only thing that kept the gears from grinding into dust. Malachor's eyes cleared. The madness flickered and died, replaced by a sudden, crushing weight of realization. He looked at the droids fixing his sabotage. He looked at the human who had refused to be a sacrifice. I missed the beat," Malachor whispered. He let go of the switch. The navel went silent. The orange glow faded to a calm, cooling blue. The thermal regulators stabilized. The Ouroboros Ring was safe. Malachor slumped against the console, his energy spent, his robes turning to dull gray ash. He wasn't a monster anymore. He was just an old man who had forgotten how to care for his tools. Cyrus stood there for a long time, his hands still on the console. He looked at the droids. He looked at his friends. He looked at the pulsar core pulsing gently behind the graviton shield. He had won. Not through power, but through maintenance. Not through magic, but through connection. He turned to me, a tired smile touching his lips. "Sit rep 749? I checked the sensors. I checked the grid. I checked the heartbeats of every being on the station. "Station is green, Cyrus," I said, my voice box sounding remarkably clear. "The rhythm is perfect. We're home, chummer. We're home." Cyrus nodded, and then, with the grace of a machine that had finally completed its cycle, he collapsed. This time there was no one to catch him but the floor. But as he hit the metal, the entire Ouroboros Ring seemed to hum. A deep, ancient sound of gratitude that echoed from the navel to the farthest spire. The union was done. The lesson had been learned. And as the medics rushed in, I realized that the time for sacrifices was over. It was time for the repairs to begin. The recovery of the Ouroboros Ring took 3 months of constant, back-breaking labor. It was not the kind of work that made for grand epic poems or shimmering tapestries, but it was the kind of work that made a life. I spent those 90 days rolling through the corridors of the station, watching as the walls were scrubbed of Malacor's rot and the conduits were replaced with new, reinforced alloy. But the real work was happening in the people. I saw sanguinars sharing blood synthetic with lupin stragglers whose packs had been decimated. I saw failed merchants donating glints to rebuild the orphanages in sub-level 9. I saw Edith leading the Fae in a new song, not a song of meditation, but a song of reconstruction. The Nexara Academy was no longer a place of hierarchy. It had become a workshop. Cyrus was finally released from the medical spire on a Tuesday afternoon, station time. He didn't have a grand ceremony. He didn't have a parade. He simply walked out of the double doors, leaning on a new crutch made of polished iron wood and silver. His brown coat had been meticulously repaired by Pip, who had spent 50 hours learning how to use a human-style sewing machine. I was waiting for him at the lift, my treads freshly oiled and my optical sensors gleaming. "Ready for the final inspection, navigator?" I asked. Cyrus smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. "I think the inspection is already done, 749. How's the core?" "Steady as a heartbeat," I said. "The pulsar is settled at 60 cycles per second. We haven't had a single entropy flicker in 3 weeks. The regents are waiting for you at the Ouroboros gate." We took the express lift to the outermost deck, the one that looked out over the entire station and the pulsar beyond. The view was breathtaking. The ring was no longer a bone-white skeleton. It was glowing with a vibrant, multicolored life. The ships docking at the bay weren't just shuttles. They were traders from across the sector, drawn to the new light of Nexara. Vespera, Harkon, Sylph, and Edith were standing at the railing. They wore their ceremonial robes, but they were modified. Each of them wore a small copper-bound gear over their hearts, the symbol of the fifth house, the house of the human, the house of the mechanic. "You're leaving," Vespera said, her voice a soft, melodic chime. It wasn't a question. "The station is fixed," Cyrus said, looking out at the stars. "The union is stable. You don't need a synchronizer anymore. You need a crew, and you have the best one in the galaxy." "But where will you go?" Edith asked, her starlight body shimmering with a gentle sadness. "The magic dead zones they are empty." "They aren't empty," Cyrus said. "They're just out of sync. There are 1,000 stations like this one, drifting in the dark, falling apart because nobody remembers how to fix the gears. My grandfather gave me this heart for a reason. It wasn't just to save one ring. It was to remind the universe how to keep time." He walked to the edge of the railing and looked down at the Ouroboros Ring. He stood there for a long time, the wind from the ether vents ruffling his hair, his hand resting on the ticking heart in his chest. "I spent 24 years of my life thinking that being a scavenger was the only way to survive. I thought the world was a machine that was designed to break us, and the only smart move was to grab what you could and hide in the shadows. I treated my own heart like a burden, a heavy piece of brass and steel that separated me from everyone else. I thought that by staying hidden, I was staying safe. But standing here, looking at the light we built together, I realized how wrong I was. The universe isn't a machine that's trying to break us. It's a machine that we are part of. Every time I reached out to fix a droid, or to help a wolf, or to hold a hand, I wasn't just doing maintenance. I was building a connection. I was finding the rhythm. I used to think my grandfather's legacy was the chronocore itself, the technology of the first engine. But I see now that the real legacy was the choice to keep the clock winding. It's the decision to care for a part that isn't yours. It's the realization that kindness isn't a glitch in the programming. It's the only thing that makes the program worth running. We aren't here to be gods or masters. We're here to be the ones who keep the lights on for each other. And as long as one of us is willing to pick up a wrench, the stars will never truly go dark." Cyrus turned back to the regents. He didn't say goodbye. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 4 small, mechanical tokens, brass gears he had polished until they shone like gold. He handed one to each of them. "If the rhythm ever falters," Cyrus said, "just listen to the gears. They'll tell you where the friction is." He turned to me. "You coming, 749? There's a freighter heading for the Heliox sector in 20 minutes. I hear their atmospheric scrubbers are making a very suspicious rattling sound." 20 minutes? I chirped, my vocalizer whirring with excitement. "Cyrus, that is a highly inefficient boarding schedule. We haven't even packed the lubricant." "We'll buy it on the way," Cyrus said, stepping into the boarding tube. I followed him, my treads clicking happily against the metal. I looked back one last time at the Regents, at Pip waving his wings from the balcony, and at the Ouroboros Ring glowing in the dark. It was a beautiful, broken, wonderful machine, and it was running perfectly. As the airlock hissed shut, Cyrus adjusted his coat and checked his pocket watch. He looked at the stars, not as a scavenger looking for scrap, but as a navigator looking for a job. 749? Yes, lead meat. Do you think the universe is ready for a couple of mechanics? Probably not, I said, but I suspect we're going to fix it anyway. Cyrus smiled and we disappeared into the heart of the ship, moving toward the next beat of the cosmic clock. I spent so long thinking I was just a broken part in a world that didn't need me, only to find out that my flaws were the very things that allowed me to connect with others. I wonder, as you look at your own life and the things you think are broken or useless about yourself, what if those are actually the tools you need to fix the world around you? What is the one small act of kindness you've been holding back because you didn't think it mattered? The freighter's engines roared to life, a deep, steady thrum that echoed the ticking of a human heart. Cyrus picked up his wrench, gave it a small, satisfied toss in the air, and began to walk toward the engine room.